Okay, so here are the noun endings for the first, the second, and the third declension. Okay, so when it comes down to it, you basically have to memorize 30 endings. And I'll give you a link to a great song that you can use to sing and memorize it, and I highly recommend it. And maybe someday we can do a duet. We can do a trio with Chad, because Chad can do it too. So I talked before about, like, one of the toughest things is once you've done this memorization, then you have to figure out, okay, if an ending could be more than one thing, like, how are you going to tell the difference? And I'm just going to talk in generalities right now about this, but let's say you see a word that ends in IS with a long mark. Let's start with that. And you're thinking, okay, is this dative or is this ablative? Some of my students, they'll look at it and they'll be like, oh, it's dablative, which is their way of saying, okay, I know it's one of those two. How are you going to tell the difference? And when it comes to things like this, you can look and remember that the ablative case is usually used for objects of prepositions. So if there's a preposition in front, chances are the word is ablative. Again, eventually there won't be as many prepositions with ablatives, but for right now, especially at Latin 2 level, probably most ablatives will come after a preposition. So that's one of those things. You see an IS with a long mark, you're trying to figure out the case. You say, okay, it's either dative or ablative, which means if it's ablative, it has a preposition. If there's no prep, typically that will mean right now that it's dative. Let's say you're trying to tell the difference between this I and this I. So is it genitive singular or is it nominative plural? For that, you're going to have to look at the verb, because if it's nominative plural, that means it's a subject, which means the verb will be plural, and we'll talk about how you tell that in a second. But so those are going to be the coping mechanisms for that. Say, okay, that's why if okay, I has to be genitive singular or nominative plural, or or dative singular if it's third declension. So then that's when you're like, okay, do you know the word off the top of your head? Is it second declension or third declension? If you don't, then you need to use context to figure that out. So this is what you do a lot in Latin 2. I feel like Latin 1 a lot is just kind of like simple sentences, and it's pretty obvious what case things are. Latin 2, you're going to see endings and in a sentence, and usually in the middle you don't know if it's going to be dative, accusative, or ablative, and you're going to have to use context clues, and learning those context clues in Latin 2 is super important. But more importantly is just memorizing I am I are me sasis, o e or me sosis. Oh, and one last thing. So this is a star here, and the reason I write that is because there's no one pattern for third declension. So whereas again, as I said, virtually all second declension nouns in the nominative end in US. Neuters will have a different ending. There are some that end in either ER or IR. But most of them end in US. All first declension nominatives end in A, but there's no one pattern. So again, your teacher might have a specific thing he or she wants you to write in that box, but I tend to write a star. I tell the kids they can write whatever they want. They can write a smiley face. Some kids write an infinity. So that's just what that means in the pattern. But now your job is to memorize these endings. So then when your teacher asks you to decline a noun, you know that you're going to, hopefully, he or she will give you the nominative and the genitive and the gender. You know that you can copy those two forms. You know you need the genitive for the stem. And again, as far as gender goes, masculine and feminine will always behave the same. Neuter nouns behave a little differently. And again, I'll link to a video to explain that to you. And again, will help more. And then, so if you need to decline it, then you're going to add those endings to the stem. And then in the context of a sentence, the question I usually ask is, I would say, let's say we had the sentence, our nice friendly sentence, Taurus Ranam Redet. I would ask my students, okay, Ranam, what case is this? And you can tell me right away an am ending has to be accusative. I might say, what case and number is that? And you would say accusative singular. And then, or I might say, what is the grammatical function? And different teachers have different terms for this. Some say function in sentence, some say role, grammatical role. So you'll have to figure out what your teacher is going to ask. But if I ask that, you would say the grammatical function is a direct object. And we'll talk about some more examples in a second. Okay? So get memorizing, get those endings memorized. I'm going to link to the song that will help you do the memorization, and you're going to be in great shape. You're going to slay the dragon of Latin 2. Everyone's going to say, how do you know so much? And when you become famous as a Latin scholar, I expect you to thank me at the Academy Awards of Latin when you win the Golden Globe Academy Award for being awesome at Latin. Okay? Bye for now.